Lydia Harper didn't plan to text a billionaire. She only wanted her son to stop needing things she couldn't give. It was 12:47 a.m., the kind of hollow, airless hour when even desperation goes quiet. Lydia sat on the kitchen floor of her studio apartment, knees pulled to her chest, a stained dish towel draped over her shoulders because the last clean blanket was wrapped around Evan on the couch. The lights were on, barely, not mood lighting, survival lighting, the kind you get when you've been juggling which bill to pay and the electric company gave you one more week. Evan had stopped crying an hour ago, but only because he'd exhausted himself. The last diaper had ripped around dinner time. She'd improvised with a cut-up t-shirt and packing tape. It worked, sort of. Her phone sat on the counter, screen cracked in 3 places, battery at 9%. She stared at it like it might combust. She didn't want to ask Sam again. Her brother had helped twice already, both times with that specific sigh that said, "I love you, but you're a mess." But tonight wasn't about pride. Tonight was about a 2-year-old who didn't understand why his mother kept saying, "tomorrow." She picked up the phone, thumbs shaking as she typed, "Sam, I hate asking again, but can you lend me $40 for diapers? I'll pay you Friday." She didn't double-check the number. She didn't even look at the contact name. She just hit send, dropped her forehead to her knees, and waited. 5 minutes later, her phone buzzed. "Sorry, who's this? And do you have what you need for the baby?" Lydia's stomach dropped. She grabbed the phone, stared at the message, and felt her face go hot. Wrong number, 1 digit off. "Ignore this, please." Mistake. She locked the screen, tossed it aside, pulled the towel tighter. Another failure added to the pile. 3 blocks and several tax brackets away, Daniel Reeves sat in his penthouse office, staring at the message on his private phone. He never gave this number out. No press, no board members, no assistants. Only family. And that list had been shrinking for years. The text wasn't spam. It wasn't a scam. It was raw, real, desperate. He read it again, slowly, parsing the punctuation, the apology, the promise of repayment. "I hate asking again." That line stuck. Most people who reached out to him wanted partnerships, investments, leverage. This woman, whoever she was, just wanted diapers. He should have ignored it. Most nights he would have. Instead, his thumbs moved before his brain caught up. "Is your baby going to be okay?" Lydia stared at the reply like it had appeared in a foreign language. What kind of stranger follows up like that? Her first instinct was to block the number, but something about the question, how simply it was phrased, how human it felt, made her pause. She typed, hesitated, then sent, "We'll manage. Sorry again." "I can help. No strings." She scoffed aloud. "Right, sure. Thanks, but I don't take money from strangers." "Smart policy. I'm Daniel. Now I'm not a stranger." Lydia stared at the screen. She didn't reply. She rocked Evan back to sleep. She cried quietly, the kind of crying that doesn't come from just being broke, but from being tired of being broke. And then she did something she never thought she'd do. She opened her CashLink app and sent him her username. 3 seconds later, her phone buzzed. 1,000 received from D. Reeve. Lydia sat frozen. She blinked, opened the app again, checked the balance. $1,000. Still there. Still real. Her hands started shaking. "This is too much. I only needed $40. It's already yours. No catch. One less thing to worry about." She didn't cry when she got evicted from her last apartment. She didn't cry when Evan's father walked out 3 weeks after the birth. She didn't cry when the diner cut her hours without explanation. But this broke her. Her hands shook as she typed through blurred vision. "Thank you. I don't even know what to say." "You don't have to say anything. Just take care of your son." Lydia couldn't sleep. Even after Evan finally drifted off, his breathing soft and even. His fist curled against her chest. She lay wide awake, phone clutched in her hand like it might vanish. She reread the transfer screen. $1,000. Still there. Still real. For a long time she just stared, wondering, daring herself to believe this wasn't bait, that this stranger, this man who called himself Daniel, didn't have some quiet plan to collect later. People don't just send money to strangers. At least they never had to her. She opened their chat again, scrolling back to his last message. "Just take care of your son." No emoji, no hesitation. Just certainty. That's what scared her most. How certain he seemed. Like this kind of thing was normal for him. She typed something, deleted it, typed again, deleted again. Finally, she wrote, "You didn't have to do that." A moment passed, then another. Her phone stayed dark. She exhaled, almost relieved. Maybe he'd moved on. Maybe it really was a one-time fluke, and she could just pretend none of it happened. The phone buzzed. "I know I didn't. I wanted to." Lydia bit her lip. Then, before she could stop herself, "Why would you help someone like me? You don't even know me." The reply came faster this time. "Because once upon a time, someone helped me when they didn't have to. I've never forgotten that." She stared at the words, throat tightening. Another message appeared. "I want to pay you back." For what? For the diapers? For the kindness? For not ignoring me? Lydia's jaw clenched. "I'll figure it out." A pause. Then, "Tell me what kind of diapers Evan needs. I want to send supplies, not money." Supplies. Lydia hesitated, her pride wrestling with her exhaustion. "Only if it's really no strings." "I don't do strings. Strings are for people playing games." The next morning, a knock on the door jolted Lydia awake. Her heart stopped. "No one knocked here, not ever," the landlord texted. Her neighbors avoided eye contact. She pulled on a hoodie, tiptoed to the door, and peeked through the peephole. Delivery driver, uniform, holding 4 massive boxes. What the? She opened the door slowly. "Delivery for Lydia Harper?" She nodded mutely. "Sign here." She signed, took the boxes, closed the door. Then she sank to the floor and opened them one by one, hands trembling. Diapers, wipes, formula, baby clothes, soft, organic, the kind she'd only seen on Instagram moms with ring lights and sponsorships. At the very bottom was a small envelope. She opened it slowly. "No one should worry about diapers. Evan deserves better than barely getting by. No logo. No return address. No way to trace where it came from. Just a signature she didn't recognize from a man she hadn't even seen. But she felt it in her chest, this strange, uncertain warmth that sat somewhere between gratitude and suspicion. Who was this man? And what did he really want? Lydia didn't touch the boxes again for hours. They sat in the corner of the living room like a dream she didn't want to wake from. Evan had fallen asleep in her arms after his first full bottle in days, and she hadn't moved since. She just sat there, staring at her son's chest rising and falling, wondering what kind of world she'd just stepped into. She wasn't naive. People didn't do things like this. Not without a catch, not without cameras rolling somewhere. But there was no viral video, no receipt, just silence. And that name again, Daniel. She reached for her phone and opened a browser. She hesitated. She didn't want to know, but she had to know. She typed, "Daniel Reeve." The results loaded faster than she was ready for. Daniel Reeve, CEO, Reeve Global Development's net worth, $11.8 billion, private tech mogul, former venture capital, widower, no children. Her stomach flipped. This wasn't just some generous stranger. This was him. The billionaire who owned half the patents in smart infrastructure, the one Forbes called the ghost mogul because he avoided interviews like they were contagious. There were only 3 official photos of him online. All serious, unsmiling. One showed him walking out of a congressional hearing with cold eyes and a clenched jaw. The man didn't just live in another world, he built it. So why was he texting her? Why did he send $1,000 and a truckload of baby supplies to a woman with no job, no car, and a leaky roof? Lydia's hands shook slightly as she clicked back to their message thread. She stared at his last text. "Evan deserves better than barely getting by." It didn't sound like a billionaire. It sounded like someone who'd been close to starving and never forgot it. She typed, hesitated, then hit send. "Why are you really doing this?" He didn't answer right away. She waited, 10 minutes, then 20. Her heart sank. Maybe he regretted it. Maybe he realized she wasn't worth the trouble. Her phone finally lit up. "Because I know what it's like to lose someone you can't save, and because no child should ever feel that kind of pain." Lydia stared at those words, stunned. They weren't transactional. They weren't poetic either. They were just true, and they hurt. "I don't want your pity," she replied. It's not pity, it's recognition. Lydia leaned her head against the wall and closed her eyes. There was a beat of silence between them. Then her phone buzzed again. Tell me something. What did you do before Evan? She blinked at the screen, caught off guard. I worked in a diner. Before that, I used to sketch, draw, nothing serious. Why'd you stop? Life got complicated. Another pause, then start again. Lydia frowned. It's not that simple. It is if someone buys the pencils. She laughed, a real laugh, surprised and sharp. You're a terrible negotiator. Maybe I'm done winning. And just like that, the conversation shifted. They talked about kids, about grief, about survival, about the things people don't say in job interviews or first dates, the raw, unpolished truth. When she finally set her phone down hours later, the sun was starting to rise. Evan stirred in her arms, yawning. Lydia looked down at him, then back at her phone. And for the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was drowning. She felt like someone had just thrown her a lifeline. Lydia didn't know it yet, but that wrong number, that single mistyped digit, had just rewritten the entire trajectory of her life. Because Daniel Reeve wasn't just a billionaire with a soft spot for struggling mothers. He was a man haunted by the family he couldn't save. And Lydia Harper, with her stubborn pride and quiet resilience, reminded him of something he thought he'd lost forever: hope. 3 days passed before her phone buzzed again. Lydia was folding laundry, Evan's tiny socks, his dinosaur shirts, when the message came through. Did the diapers fit? She blinked at the screen, surprised by how casual it sounded, like they were old friends checking in. She typed back, They did. You sound like customer service. His reply came faster than expected. Then let me upgrade to coffee. Lydia stared at the message. Coffee, with a billionaire. Her first instinct was to laugh it off. Her second was to decline politely. But something stopped her. Maybe curiosity, maybe loneliness, maybe the fact that his messages didn't feel transactional. They felt human. Still, she hesitated. I don't think that's a good idea. Why not? Because you're you, and I'm not. I'm just someone who wants to buy you coffee. No cameras, no press, no expectations. She didn't respond. The next day, he messaged again. Still thinking about it? You're persistent. Only about things that matter. 2 days later, she finally caved. Fine, one coffee, but somewhere quiet. Deal. Tomorrow, 10 a.m. Riverside Park Cafe? Lydia typed okay and immediately regretted it. She almost didn't go. That morning she stood in front of her closet staring at the 3 outfits she owned that weren't stained or stretched out. She settled on jeans and a plain gray sweater. Nothing fancy, nothing trying too hard. Evan sat on the floor, watching her with wide, curious eyes. Mama's meeting a friend, she said, more to herself than to him, except Daniel Reeve wasn't a friend. He was a stranger who'd sent her $1,000 in a pile of baby supplies, a man who'd lost his wife and somehow still had enough heart left to care about hers. She strapped Evan into his stroller and headed out. The cafe sat tucked between 2 oak trees overlooking the river, small tables, soft acoustic music, the kind of place that didn't care if you lingered. Lydia arrived early, nerves buzzing under her skin. Then she saw him. Daniel Reeve sat at a corner table, alone. No bodyguards, no entourage, just him, jeans, a plain black sweater, hands wrapped around a coffee cup like he was trying to warm something frozen inside. He looked up when she approached, and for a moment, neither of them spoke. He looked different than his photos. Older, maybe. More tired. Like someone who'd survived something but hadn't fully recovered. Lydia, he said quietly, standing. Daniel. He gestured to the chair across from him. Thanks for coming. She sat, adjusting Evan's stroller beside her. I almost didn't. I'm glad you did. A barista came by. Lydia ordered black coffee. Daniel already had his. Silence settled between them. Not uncomfortable, just uncertain. Finally, Lydia broke it. You don't look like your photos. He smiled faintly. Those were taken before my wife passed, before the noise. Her throat tightened. I'm sorry, I read about her. I figured you would. He didn't sound upset, just resigned. It's okay. Most people do. Does it ever get easier? No, he said honestly. But it gets quieter. Lydia nodded, understanding more than she wanted to. They talked for over an hour. about loss, about survival, about the weight of carrying someone else's future on your back. Daniel asked about Evan, about her, about what life looked like before everything fell apart. "I used to draw," she said, surprising herself. "Nothing serious. Just sketches. Faces mostly. Landscapes when I had time." "Why'd you stop?" She shrugged. "Life, bills, Evan. It didn't feel important anymore." "But it was," he said, leaning forward slightly. "Wasn't it?" She looked down at her coffee. "Yeah, it was." "Then draw again." "It's not that simple." "It is if someone buys the pencils." Lydia laughed, a real startled laugh that broke through the heaviness. "You're a terrible negotiator." Daniel's mouth curved into the faintest smile. "Maybe I'm done winning." She tilted her head, studying him. "What do you win by helping me?" "Nothing," he said. "And that's the point." Something shifted between them then, fragile, unspoken, but undeniably real. Before she left, Daniel walked her to the stroller. Evan had fallen asleep, his tiny fist curled around his giraffe. "He's lucky," Daniel said softly. "He's poor," Lydia corrected. "He's loved. That's richer than most." Lydia looked up at him, and for the first time she saw past the wealth, past the tragedy, past the walls. She saw someone who understood. "Let's make a deal," Daniel said. "You draw again, I'll keep buying the coffee." She smiled despite herself. "Deal." As she walked away, pushing the stroller down the tree-lined path, she glanced back once. Daniel was still standing there, hands in his pockets, watching her leave. Not like a stranger. Like someone who'd just found something he didn't know he was looking for. That night, Lydia sat on her apartment floor, staring at a blank piece of paper. She hadn't drawn in years. But for the first time in forever, her fingers itched to try. She picked up a pen and sketched a single line. Then another. By the time Evan woke from his nap, she'd drawn a face. Not hers, not Evan's, Daniel's. She stared at it for a long time, then folded the paper and tucked it away. She didn't realize it yet, but that coffee, that single hour in a quiet cafe, had just changed both their lives forever. The text started small, a simple, "How's Evan?" one afternoon. A "Did you eat today?" late at night when Lydia was too tired to remember. At first, she answered out of politeness, then habit, then something else entirely, something that felt dangerously close to comfort. Daniel never pushed, never pried. He just showed up, in her inbox, in her thoughts, in the quiet moments when she realized she was smiling at her phone like a teenager. 2 weeks after their coffee, he sent her a message that made her pause mid-diaper change. "Draw what hope looks like." She stared at it, confused. "What?" "Creative prompt, no rules, just draw it." "I don't have supplies." "Yes, you do. Check your door." Lydia's heart skipped. She set Evan down, walked to the door, and opened it. A box, medium-sized, plain brown packaging. She carried it inside, sat on the floor, and opened it slowly. Pencils, charcoal sticks, sketch pads with thick, creamy paper, erasers, blending stumps. A small wooden box filled with pastels in every shade she could imagine. At the bottom, a note. For the artist who forgot she was one. Lydia's vision blurred. She picked up a pencil, tested its weight in her hand. It felt foreign and familiar all at once, like running into an old friend you thought you'd lost forever. That night, after Evan fell asleep, she sat at the kitchen table and drew, not hope. Not yet. Just lines, shapes, the curve of Evan's cheek from memory, the way the streetlight outside her window cut through the blinds. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. And for the first time in years, she felt like herself again. The phone calls started a week later. Daniel called late one night, 10:47 p.m., and she almost didn't answer, but she did. "Did I wake you?" His voice was low, careful. "No, Evan's asleep. I was just sketching." "Yeah, what are you drawing?" She looked down at the paper. "The skyline. From my window. It's not great." "I doubt that. You haven't seen it." "Then show me." She hesitated, then snapped a photo and sent it. Silence. Then, "That's beautiful, Lydia. Her chest tightened. "You're just being nice." "I'm not." He paused. "I don't waste words on things I don't mean." They talked for over an hour. About art, about the way grief changes the shape of time, about parenthood, hers lived, his lost. When they finally hung up, Lydia realized she'd been smiling the entire time. The calls became routine. Sometimes they talked about nothing, the weather, what Evan ate that day, a funny thing Daniel overheard at a board meeting. Other times they talked about everything, his wife, her fears, the weight of carrying on when you didn't know how. One night, Evan toddled over mid-call and babbled into the phone. Daniel laughed, a real, unguarded laugh that Lydia had never heard before. "Hey, buddy," he said gently. "You taking care of your mom?" Evan giggled, smacking the phone with his tiny hand. Lydia pulled him back, grinning. "Sorry, he's obsessed with phones now." "He's got good taste." After that, Evan started asking for Dan whenever Lydia's phone rang. She'd hold the speaker to his ear, and Daniel would talk to him in that same soft, patient voice, asking about his day, telling him silly stories, making him laugh. It became a ritual, a connection, a bridge between two worlds that shouldn't have touched, but somehow did. One evening, after another late-night call, Daniel said something that stopped Lydia cold. "You know, I never respond to random texts." She frowned. "What?" "That night. When you messaged me, I should have ignored it. I've ignored hundreds before." "Then why didn't you?" Silence, then quietly. "Because I felt it. The desperation, the honesty. It reminded me of something I'd forgotten." "What?" "That people still need people." Lydia's throat tightened. "Daniel, I'm not saying this to make you feel guilty," he added quickly. "I'm saying it because, I don't know. I wanted you to know it mattered. That text. It mattered." She didn't know what to say, so she just whispered, "It mattered to me too." The warmth started creeping in after that, slow, gradual, undeniable. She caught herself thinking about him during the day, wondering what he was doing, smiling when his name lit up her screen. It scared her. Because this wasn't just gratitude anymore. It wasn't just friendship. It was something else, something she didn't have a name for yet. One night, after tucking Evan in, Lydia sat down with her sketch pad. She didn't plan what to draw. She just let her hand move. When she looked down, her breath caught. 3 figures, a woman, a child, a man, holding hands, standing together. The man's face was blank, unfinished, but his posture was unmistakable, protective, present. Lydia stared at the drawing for a long time. It was a family, one that didn't exist yet, but one she couldn't stop imagining. She closed the sketch pad quickly, heart pounding, and shoved it under the couch. Not yet, not now, but maybe, someday. That night, Daniel texted her one last prompt. "Draw what family feels like." Lydia stared at the message, her pulse racing. She typed back slowly, "I think I just did." His response came a minute later. "Then I can't wait to see it." She set the phone down, pulled her knees to her chest, and let herself feel it. The warmth, the possibility, the terrifying hope that maybe, just maybe, she wasn't alone anymore. And somewhere across the city, Daniel Reeves sat in his empty penthouse, staring at his phone, feeling the exact same thing. The eviction notice came on a Tuesday. Lydia found it taped to her door when she got back from the corner store. A single white envelope with "Notice to Vacate" stamped across the front in bold red letters. Her hands shook as she tore it open. Building sold. All tenants must vacate within 21 days. No exceptions, 21 days. 3 weeks to find a new place, scrape together a deposit, and somehow keep Evan fed and safe in the meantime. She leaned against the doorframe, the paper crumpling in her fist. She wanted to scream, to cry, to punch something. But Evan was napping inside, and she'd learned a long time ago that falling apart was a luxury she couldn't afford. So she stuffed the notice into her bag, walked inside, and started searching rental listings on her cracked phone screen. Every single one required first month, last month, and a security deposit. She didn't have any of it. 2 days later, the diner manager called her in early. Lydia's stomach dropped the moment she saw his face. "We're cutting staff," he said, not even bothering to sit down. Corporate decision. Last hired, first let go. Your last shift is Friday. She stared at him. You're firing me? Laying you off. There's a difference. Not to my rent there isn't, he shrugged, already turning away. Sorry, Harper. It's business. Lydia walked out before he could see her cry. That night she sat on the floor of her apartment staring at the eviction notice, the final paycheck stub, and the empty fridge. Her phone buzzed. Daniel. How was your day? She almost didn't respond, almost typed fine and left it at that. But she was so tired of pretending. I'm getting evicted, and I just lost my job. The reply came instantly. What do you need? Time? Money? A miracle? Take your pick. Lydia, I'm serious. What do you need? She closed her eyes, exhausted. I'll figure it out. You don't have to. Yes, I do. Her phone rang. She hesitated, then answered. Stop trying to do this alone, Daniel said, his voice firm but not unkind. I'm not asking you to fix my life, Daniel. I'm not offering to fix it. I'm offering to help you breathe while you do. I can't just... You and Evan will not end up on the street. Pack a bag. Lydia's throat tightened. Daniel, I can't take more from you. You're not taking. I'm giving. There's a difference. Why? She whispered. Why do you even care? Silence. Then, softly, because no one deserves to fight this hard just to survive. She resisted for 3 days. 3 days of sleepless nights, frantic apartment searches, and mounting panic. Then the final eviction notice arrived. Certified mail, no extensions, no second chances. Lydia stared at it, then picked up her phone. Okay. Daniel's response came immediately. I'll send the address. Pack what you need. I'll handle the rest. She expected a mansion. Some sprawling estate with gates and security cameras and marble floors that echoed when you walked. Instead, the GPS led her to a narrow dirt road that wound through trees and ended at a small lakeside cottage. Lydia sat in the borrowed car, Daniel had arranged it, and stared. The cottage was simple, weathered wood, a wraparound porch, flower boxes under the windows. Beyond it, the lake stretched out like glass, reflecting the late afternoon sky. It looked like a postcard, like something from a dream. She unbuckled Evan from his car seat and walked up the steps. The front door was unlocked. Inside, the cottage smelled like cedar and fresh linen. Soft rugs covered the floors. A couch sat by the window, draped with a thick knitted blanket. The kitchen was small but fully stocked. Fresh fruit on the counter, milk in the fridge, bread in a basket. And in the living room, scattered across the floor, were toys, a rocking horse, wooden blocks, picture books, a basket of plush animals. Evan squealed, breaking free from her arms and toddling toward the pile. Lydia's eyes burned. On the kitchen table sat a single note, handwritten on cream-colored paper. Every person deserves a soft place to land. D. She sank into a chair, the note clutched in her hand, and let the tears come. That night, after Evan was asleep in the small bedroom, tucked into a bed with clean sheets and a nightlight shaped like a moon, Lydia stood by the window. The lake was dark now, the stars reflected on its surface like scattered diamonds. She pressed her palm against the cool glass and whispered into the stillness. Why me? No one answered. But as she looked at her reflection, her and Evan's shadowy outlines framed by the warm glow of the cottage, she felt it. Hope. Not the desperate, clawing kind she'd carried for so long, but the quiet, steady kind. The kind that whispered maybe instead of never. For the first time in months, Evan slept through the night. And so did she. The next morning, Lydia woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the sound of birds outside. She walked into the living room, still half asleep, and froze. There was a new box on the kitchen table. She opened it slowly. Inside, fresh groceries, more art supplies, and a small envelope. She opened the note. You're not alone anymore. D. Lydia pressed the paper to her chest, eyes stinging, and whispered to the empty room. Thank you. And somewhere across town, Daniel Reeves sat in his office, staring at his phone, hoping she meant it. Because for the first time since his wife died, he didn't feel like a ghost in his own life. He felt like he had a reason to stay. The knock came at dusk. Lydia had been sitting on the porch with the sketch pad, trying to capture the way the light hit the water. Evan was napping inside, and for the first time in months, she didn't feel the familiar panic clawing at her chest, the constant hum of, "What now?" She looked up, pencil still in hand. Daniel stood at the bottom of the cottage steps, hands full of takeout containers, wearing jeans and a soft gray shirt that made him look less like a billionaire and more like someone who'd gotten tired of pretending. "Hi," he said simply. "Hi," she replied, setting down her sketch pad. Something shifted in his expression when he saw her. Not quite a smile, but close, like he'd been holding his breath and had just let himself exhale. Inside, they spread the food across the kitchen table. Thai takeout, still warm, smelling like garlic and coconut and promise. Lydia moved around him carefully, aware of every inch of space between them, aware that it was shrinking. "You didn't have to come," she said, pulling plates from the cabinet. "I wanted to." Those 4 words again. They were becoming dangerous. They ate quietly at first, the kind of comfortable silence that only happens between people who've already said the hard things. Outside, the sun bled orange and pink across the water. "Thank you," Lydia said finally, "for all of this. The cottage, the supplies, I don't know how to—" "You don't have to know how," Daniel interrupted gently. "You just have to let it happen." She looked at him, fork frozen halfway to her plate. "I'm not good at that." "I know." "How could you possibly know that?" He set down his fork, and suddenly the air felt heavier. "Because I see myself in you," he said quietly. "That armor, that need to carry everything alone." He paused, jaw tightening. "My wife used to tell me I was a coward about needing people." Lydia's chest tightened. He'd never talked about her like this before. "She was right," he continued. "I'd made enough money to insulate myself from the world. I thought independence meant strength. I thought accepting help meant weakness." He looked directly at her. "Then she got sick, and suddenly I couldn't make enough money to save her, and all that independence meant nothing." His hands gripped the edge of the table, "So I learned to build walls higher. Until your text came through, this desperate, honest plea from a stranger, and I realized I'd been the one drowning. Not you." He exhaled slowly. "That night, I didn't send money because I was being generous. I sent it because you reminded me what it feels like to be human." Lydia's eyes burned. "I don't know how to accept kindness," she whispered. "Every time someone helps me, I'm just waiting for them to take it back, waiting for the catch." "There is no catch. There's always a catch. Not with me." She wanted to believe him. She wanted to surrender to it, this feeling that had been growing like spring pushing through winter, but fear had become her native language. "I'm afraid," she admitted. "Of what?" "That this isn't real. That I'll wake up back in that apartment, broke and alone, and this will just be something I imagined." Daniel reached across the table. His fingers stopped just short of hers, giving her the choice. She took it. His hand was warm, real, solid. "It's real," he said. And then Evan wandered in, rubbing his eyes, still half asleep from his nap. He climbed directly into Daniel's lap, something he'd never done before, and Daniel's entire face softened. Dan, Evan mumbled against his chest. "Hey, buddy." The toddler wiggled free after a few seconds, distracted by something on the counter. Lydia pulled out some paper and a handful of crayons from the box Daniel had left. Evan settled onto the floor, completely focused, his tongue poking out in concentration. Lydia and Daniel continued eating, but their attention kept drifting to the small boy scribbling furiously. After 10 minutes, Evan climbed to his feet and waddled over, holding up his masterpiece. 3 figures, clearly intentional. A small yellow circle with scribbly hair on the left, a taller blue figure in the middle, a larger red figure on the right. Beneath them, a wavy line of blue, the lake. Lydia's breath stopped. She looked at Daniel. He was staring at the drawing with an expression she couldn't quite read. "What do you see?" she asked softly. Daniel reached out slowly, taking the paper like it was made of spun glass. His thumb traced the careful lines Evan had drawn. "I see a family," he whispered. The words hung between them, electric and terrifying. Lydia reached for Evan, her hands trembling slightly as she pulled him close. He immediately lost interest, wriggling free to chase the cat that didn't exist. "He doesn't understand what he's drawing," she said, voice barely audible. Maybe, Daniel replied, still holding the paper. Or maybe he understands more than we do. He looked at her then, and something in his eyes, something raw and honest and completely unguarded, made her catch her breath. Lydia, he started. Don't, she whispered. Not because she didn't want to hear it, but because if he said it out loud, she'd have to believe it was possible, and belief felt more dangerous than desperation. He nodded, folding the drawing carefully. Okay. But he set it on the table between them. A promise. Later that night, after Daniel left and Evan was tucked into bed, Lydia lay on the cottage bed and stared at the ceiling. Her heart was doing something it hadn't done in years. It was hoping, and it was absolutely terrifying. She pulled out her sketch pad with trembling fingers and drew the thing she'd been too afraid to draw. Not a possibility. A future. A woman and a man and a small boy standing together by water under a star-filled sky. The woman's hand resting in the man's, the boy between them. Safe, seen, home. She stared at the image, tears blurring her vision. Then she carefully tore out the page and tucked it under her pillow. Not ready to show anyone. Not yet. But finally, ready to let herself want it. And as sleep pulled her under, she whispered into the darkness, "Please let this be real." 6 months had changed everything. Lydia's drawings had started small, sketches posted on Instagram from the cottage porch, faces caught mid-emotion, landscapes that ached with longing, the work of someone who'd learned to feel again. Then a design firm noticed, then an agent, then commissions started arriving, actual paying work, the kind that let her stop holding her breath every time a bill arrived. Evan had stopped asking when they were leaving. The cottage had become home. And Daniel had become something she couldn't name, something she couldn't afford to lose. Something she'd stopped pretending was just friendship. He came to dinner every Friday, sometimes Wednesday too. He brought takeout or ingredients and cooked in the small kitchen while Evan played at his feet. They'd become a rhythm, the three of them. Not quite a family, but something close enough that Lydia had stopped correcting herself when she thought the word. She'd even started sketching him. Not the polished, distant billionaire from photographs, but this version, relaxed, laughing, his guard finally lowered. On a Friday evening in late autumn, she waited for him on the porch. 6 o'clock came, then 6:15, then 6:30. His text arrived at 6:47. Something came up, emergency board meeting. "I'm sorry." Lydia typed back, "It's okay, be safe." She meant it. She always meant it. But disappointment sat heavy in her chest as she heated up leftovers for Evan and tried not to check her phone every 30 seconds. At 11 p.m., she was brushing her teeth when the news alert flashed across her screen. Breaking, tech billionaire Daniel Reeve injured in highway collision. Her toothbrush clattered into the sink. The article was sparse. Multi-car pileup on Interstate 90. One vehicle struck at high speed. Injuries sustained. Hospital transport. Condition unknown. Unknown. She read it 3 times, each word a punch. Her hands moved without her permission. Keys grabbed. Evan bundled into the car seat, still wearing his pajamas. The cottage door left unlocked as she reversed down the driveway too fast. The hospital was 20 minutes away. She made it in 12. Reporters clustered outside the emergency entrance like vultures. She parked in the back lot and walked in through the ambulance bay, Evan heavy on her hip, her heart a jackhammer in her chest. The fluorescent lights were too bright. Everything was too bright and too loud and too sterile. She found the intensive care floor by following signs. A nurse tried to stop her, but Lydia just said his name, Daniel Reeve. And something in her voice must have convinced them she belonged here. They directed her down a corridor that smelled like antiseptic and fear. His room was at the end. She stopped at the threshold, afraid to see. Then she stepped inside. Daniel lay in the hospital bed, hooked to monitors and IV lines. Bandages wrapped his left shoulder. His face was mottled with bruises, purples and yellows blooming across his jaw, his temple. But his eyes were open, and when he saw her, he smiled. "You came," he whispered. Something inside her cracked open. "Of course I came," she said, her voice breaking. "Of course I—" She set Evan down gently in the chair, and then she was moving, carefully, desperately, afraid to touch him and terrified not to. She took his hand, the one without the IV. "Don't you dare," she whispered fiercely. "Don't you dare leave us. Do you understand me? You don't get to do this. You don't get to come into our lives and teach us how to hope and then just—" Her voice cracked. "I can't lose you," she finished, the words tumbling out raw and unfiltered. "I can't. I won't." Daniel's eyes glistened. "I'm not going anywhere," he said, his voice rough from pain or emotion or both. "I promise." "You can't promise that. No one can promise that. Then let me promise something else." He shifted slightly, wincing, and raised her hand to his lips. "For months, I've been terrified to say this, terrified it would scare you away. But lying here, wondering if I was going to make it," he looked at her directly, "I realized something." Lydia's breath caught. "I'm done being the stranger you texted," he continued softly. "I'm done pretending this is something temporary. I'm done building walls instead of building a life." His thumb traced circles on the back of her hand. "Lydia, I want to stop being a friend. I want to start being family. Real family. The kind that sticks. The kind that chooses each other on purpose, every single day." In the chair beside them, Evan had fallen asleep, his small hand clutching Daniel's discarded phone. Lydia looked at her son, then at the man in the hospital bed. Then at their joined hands, the evidence that something broken could be mended, that something lost could be found. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay? Okay, family, real family." She leaned forward carefully and rested her forehead against his, breathing him in, hospital soap and pain medication in Daniel. "But you have to heal," she said, "completely, because we have plans now, all three of us." "What kind of plans?" She pulled back slightly, tears streaming down her face. "The kind where we don't have to pretend anymore." Daniel smiled. A real smile, despite the bruises, despite the pain. "Then I'll heal fast." That night, Lydia sat in the uncomfortable hospital chair with Evan asleep against her shoulder and Daniel's hand still in hers. The monitors beeped their steady rhythm. Outside, the city hummed with indifferent life. But inside this small room, something had shifted. It wasn't about saving each other anymore. It wasn't about rescue or gratitude or the mathematics of debt. It was about choosing, again and again and again, about a wrong number that had turned into a right life, about three people who'd each been drowning finding out that together they could swim. She looked at Daniel sleeping fitfully, then at Evan curled against her, then down at her hand still clasped in his. And she understood, finally, what love actually was. Not the dramatic kind from movies, but the quiet kind, the staying kind, the choosing kind. The kind that said, "I see you, and I'm not going anywhere." She closed her eyes and held on. The cottage had become a sanctuary. 3 months into Daniel's recovery, the penthouse felt too distant, too cold, too full of the person he used to be. So he'd stayed at Haven House. That's what Lydia had started calling the cottage, somewhere between a joke and a prayer. Now it was late afternoon, golden light pooling through the windows. Lydia sat sketching in the chair beside his, one hand periodically reaching over to check his physical therapy exercises, the rotation of his shoulder, the strength returning slowly, deliberately. Evan played with blocks at their feet, building and destroying with the beautiful logic of a 3-year-old. This was their rhythm now. Not glamorous. Not the kind of love that made headlines, just the steady, unglamorous work of healing, drawing breath together, existing in the same room, choosing each other in the small moments. "What are you working on?" Daniel asked, tilting his head to see her sketchpad. "Community Center Commission. They want murals for the youth art program. The one that you funded quietly in my name," she finished, not looking up from her drawing. "Yes, the one you thought I wouldn't notice." He smiled. He did that more now, smiled like a man who'd nearly died and discovered life was worth the effort. "Did it work?" "No," Mrs. Chen told me immediately. "You're terrible at being anonymous." I was trying to be romantic. "You succeeded," she said softly. "Just not privately." She finally looked at him, and something in her expression made his chest tighten. Love looked like this, like a woman in a cottage with paint-stained fingers, sketching designs for children she'd never met, funded by a man she'd accidentally texted. 2 weeks later, Daniel stood beside her at a tech industry gala, the kind of event he usually avoided, full of press and performance and people wanting pieces of him. But tonight, he wanted them to see. The announcer's voice echoed across the ballroom. And please welcome our host, Daniel Reeve, along with Lydia Harper, the artist behind the Reeve Community Art Center. The room applauded. He felt her hand tense in his. "Breathe," he whispered. At the microphone, he stood quiet for a moment, letting the cameras settle on them. "I've spent 20 years building things," he began. "Infrastructure, technology, wealth, all the markers of success." He paused. Then one night, someone texted me by accident, asked me for $40 for diapers, and I realized I'd been building the wrong things. In the crowd, people shifted. Journalists leaned forward. "This woman," he continued, squeezing her hand, "reminded me that life isn't about what you accumulate. It's about who you choose. It's about the moments between the moments. It's about being human enough to answer a stranger's text." He turned to face her directly. "Lydia Harper is the woman who reminded me what life feels like, and I'm grateful every single day that she dialed wrong." The room erupted, but Lydia heard nothing except his heartbeat against hers and the whispered promise in his words. Over the following months, their life took shape, not scripted, just authentic. Lydia taught art classes in the community center's newly painted studio. Kids with rough edges and bright futures covered canvas with their chaos and hope. She saw herself in every one of them, the hunger for something beautiful, the belief that their creations mattered. Daniel watched from the observation window sometimes, his shoulder fully healed now, his hand often resting at the small of her back when they walked. On Evan's 4th birthday, they took him to the lake, the same one where the cottage sat, where he'd drawn 3 figures by water, where love had learned to be quiet and steady. The sun was setting, that particular gold that only happens in late summer when the world seems to pause and hold its breath. Lydia wore a simple dress, nothing fancy. Her hair was loose. She had paint under one fingernail from that morning's class. She was beautiful in the way things are beautiful when they're real. They walked to the water's edge, Evan running ahead to chase the last fireflies of evening. "Lydia," Daniel said, and something in his voice made her turn. He was kneeling, not on one knee like in movies, both knees in the sand like he'd dropped everything to be at her level, to meet her as an equal, not from above. In his hands, he held something small and framed. Her first text. "Sam, I hate asking again, but can you lend me $40 for diapers?" Printed carefully, preserved like something sacred. "I've spent the last year and a half trying to figure out why I answered that text," he said, his voice steady but thick with emotion. "Why, out of 1,000 wrong numbers, yours reached me." He looked at the framed text, then back at her. "And I think it's because the universe knew what my heart needed before I did. It knew I was broken. It knew I'd stopped believing in grace." Tears were streaming down Lydia's face. "So I'm asking you now," he continued, "not because I have to, not because I'm rescuing you or you're saving me, but because choosing you, choosing this, choosing us, is the best decision I've ever made." He pulled out a ring then, simple, elegant, the diamond catching the last light of day. "Will you marry me? Will you let me spend the rest of my life answering all your texts? Will you be my family?" "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, yes." He slipped the ring onto her finger and stood, pulling her close. And then Evan ran between them, his small arms wrapping around both their legs, sealing the circle, completing what a wrong number had started. The 3 of them stood there as the sun melted into the horizon, a woman, a man, and a child, bound by accident and choice, and the kind of love that doesn't announce itself loudly, the kind that just stays, that simply, quietly, forever stays. The ceremony happened on a Saturday in spring, when the lake was just beginning to remember warmth. No photographers, no society pages, no story for the tabloids, just a woman in a simple white dress, a man in a gray suit, and a small boy in a miniature tuxedo, standing by the water where everything had changed. Evan held the rings in a small pillow, taking his job with grave seriousness. He'd practiced for weeks, walking between his mother and Daniel, solemnly delivering this symbol of forever. When it came time, he handed Daniel the ring with all the ceremony of a 4-year-old who understood something important was happening. Daniel slipped it onto Lydia's finger, not the engagement ring, but something new, something that said, "You're mine and I'm yours, and we chose this together." "I vow," he said, his voice steady and true. To answer every text, to fund every dream, to be present for every moment, to love you not because I'm saving you, but because you're worth saving for. Lydia couldn't speak through her tears, so she just kissed him, and Evan cheered, and the universe seemed to pause and smile. Their home, the cottage expanded now, a full art studio added to one side, looked like what happens when two broken people decide to build something together. One wall held Lydia's canvases. Another, Daniel's desk where he managed his business empire from the quiet. Between them, Evan's artwork covered the refrigerator like medals of honor. There were no walls between the studio and the office, just an open, flowing space where they could see each other while working. Where love wasn't something scheduled. It was just there, woven into the fabric of their days. 3 months after the wedding, Lydia's first solo exhibition opened at the city's Contemporary Art Museum. She didn't know Daniel was there. He stood in the back, incognito in a baseball cap and glasses, watching her move through the gallery. She wore a navy dress and looked terrified and radiant in equal measure. Her paintings hung on pristine white walls, 40 pieces that told the story of a woman learning to hope. Faces caught mid-emotion, the lake in every season, Evan's silhouette against light, and one, prominently displayed, 3 figures holding hands by water, titled simply, Home. A small brass placard read, "On loan from the collection of Daniel Reeve." He watched critics study her work, watched collectors request pricing, watched a woman he'd met because of a wrong number stand in front of everything she'd created, and finally believe she was enough. When she looked toward the back of the gallery, their eyes met across the crowd. She knew he'd come. She just knew. Her smile broke open like sunrise. A week later, Evan came home from preschool with a question. He'd been quiet during pickup, the way he got when something big was brewing inside his small chest. They were in the kitchen, Daniel making pasta, Lydia sketching, Evan coloring at the table, when he suddenly set down his crayon. "Is Daniel my dad?" he asked. The kitchen went still. Daniel's hand froze on the wooden spoon. Lydia looked up from her sketchpad. "He can be," she said carefully, "if he wants to be. But that's his choice to make." Daniel set down the spoon and turned to face the small boy who'd drawn his future before anyone knew there was one. He knelt, the way he'd knelt to propose. "Evan," he said softly, "I've wanted to be your dad since the night you fell asleep on my lap. I've just been waiting for you to be ready." "Are you ready now?" Evan asked. "I've been ready forever." "Then you're my dad." Simple as that. A child's logic, pure and perfect. Daniel pulled Evan close, and Lydia saw her son's face, relaxed, certain, home, and understood that some people enter your life not by appointment, but by grace. That night, Evan called Daniel Dad 400 times. Once for every moment he'd been waiting for the word to be true. The gift arrived on an ordinary Tuesday. A frame, wrapped in brown paper, sitting on Lydia's easel. She opened it slowly, already knowing it would matter. The photograph, Lydia, Evan, and Daniel at the lake, the 3 of them laughing at something someone had said just before the shutter clicked. The light was golden. The love was visible. The joy was undeniable. Beneath it, a caption in Daniel's handwriting, "The family, the universe texted together." Lydia pressed her hand to her mouth. Daniel appeared beside her, always appearing when she needed him, as if he'd learned to recognize the exact moment she needed to be held. "Do you believe in fate?" he asked. She turned to face him, tears streaming down her face. "I believe in wrong numbers," she whispered. "I believe in 1 digit off that changed everything. I believe in a billionaire who answered a desperate text from a stranger." She looked at the framed photograph. "I believe that sometimes the universe makes mistakes that are actually miracles." He kissed her forehead. That evening, Lydia stood on the cottage porch as the sun melted into the horizon. Through the window she could see them, Daniel and Evan building something with blocks, their heads bent together in concentration, Daniel's larger hand guiding her son's smaller one. She whispered to the sky, to the lake, to the universe that had arranged all of this. Maybe fate doesn't make mistakes after all. Then laughter erupted from inside the cottage, Evan's high, bright giggle, and Daniel's warm chuckle, and the sound of blocks tumbling down. She turned and went back inside, into the warmth, into the light, into the family that had started with one wrong number and decided, against all odds, to become everything right. The door closed behind her, and the lake reflected the stars, holding the memory of three people who'd found each other by accident but chose each other for life. Perfect, complete, home.